Hey everybody, I hope you guys are healthy and safe. So this is the Tecno Phantom X2. This is the first and only phone in the world with a retractable portrait lens. So yeah, that means this 50 megapixel portrait lens here will actually stick out when you need to zoom. Now you may be thinking that's it, the camera lens doesn't actually pop out that much, at least not compared to conventional point and shoot cameras. But you have to remember that the camera systems in a smartphone are much smaller than the camera systems you would normally see in a quote-unquote real camera. So everything's smaller, the scale is smaller too. For example, image sensors. A 1-inch image sensor in a smartphone is considered huge, but a 1-inch sensor in a real camera, it's just, pretty small actually. So the same thing applies here. While this camera lens only stick out this much, which doesn't seem like a lot for a real camera, but for a smartphone camera system, that's already a lot and it makes a difference. So when this lens is popped out, you get a focal length of about 65mm, which is ideal for portraits, and a depth of field focus pane of only 19cm or about 9 inches. So that means the focus pane is only about this wide, which is quite shallow. So that means if you're taking pictures of a subject, you'll get really nice separation between the subject and background, and you get natural bokeh too. For example, as a test, I took 2 shots of various subjects. So the picture on the left is a typical portrait shot using this pop-out retractable lens. The picture on the right is a 1x photo captured by the main camera, but I walked closer to get similar framing with the subject, and you can see that the portrait shot not only has stronger bokeh, that's real bokeh, not artificial, but the background also looks less distorted. You notice that in the background, the sides look a little bit elongated, look a little bit stretched out. That's what happens when you shoot with a wide-angle lens. Like right now I'm shooting with an ultra-wide lens, so if I do this, you'll see my arms look a little bit stretched out, distorted, right? That's what happens when you shoot with an ultra-wide lens. Now I'll talk a little bit more about cameras in a bit. First, let's back up, look at the whole phone, the whole package, the whole brand. So Tecno is a brand that you may not be familiar with. They're a Chinese tech brand that's been around since 2006. They've been making smartphones for several years now. But so far, they have mostly focused on launching their phones in emerging and developing markets. So these are like countries in Africa, Middle East, places like that. And I think initially Tecno did this because they sold really budget phones. They were trying to serve the market that's been underserved. Since then, Tecno has expanded its reach, selling in more premium markets with more spending power, such as Dubai. And this phone here, the Tecno Phantom X2 Pro, is definitely aimed at the premium market because it retails for around the equivalent of $900 US. So you have a 6.8-inch OLED display with minimal bezels wrapping around the screen, FHD plus resolution, colors are vibrant, they pop off the screen, viewing angles are good, and maximum brightness gets about 1000 nits, which is good enough for outdoor use. It's a really good looking screen, but it does curve dramatically on the left and right side, even more so than recent Android flagships. And I know not everyone likes curved screens, so a lot of you guys may find this curvature a little bit too dramatic. Tecno's palm rejection algorithm is good enough that I'm not getting accidental touches. There's an optical in-display fingerprint scanner here that works fast and accurately. Powering the phone is a MediaTek Dimensity 9000. It's a 4nm chip from MediaTek. It's not quite as powerful as a Snapdragon 8 Plus Gen 1, but it's about on par with the Snapdragon 8 Gen 1. So this is still a really good chip. There's 12 gigs of RAM with 256 gigs of internal storage in here. Both of these uses the latest standards, so UFS 3.1 storage and LPDDR5X RAM, and a 5100 mAh battery that can be fast charged at 45-watt charging speeds. Now there is no wireless charging and no IP water resistance rating, so these are the 2 factors that are missing from this phone that you would expect from a flagship phone. So construction of the phone overall feels premium. All the buttons are very clicky. Now, the thickness, it's a little bit thicker than a typical phone at 8.9mm because of the large battery and the retractable lens, but it's not too bad. I'm also a fan of this back design and texture. Now, this material here is so-called vegan leather, which is just a marketing PR term for synthetic plastic. But the good news is, according to Tecno at least, the plastic used to construct this vegan leather back is made from recycled waste from the Indian Ocean. Now in terms of software, this phone runs Android 12 with Tecno's Android skin on top called HiOS version 12. I'm actually surprisingly liking HiOS quite a bit. If you want to use this thing as a stock Android phone, you can. It has all the stuff that Android offers, like an aperture, a Google search bar. The only thing Tecno does that differs from what Google gives us is the notification panel. You see that if you swipe down the middle, you only get a notification shade. If you want the shortcut toggles, you have to swipe from the upper right corner to get the buttons. I'm not a fan of that. I don't know why Chinese Android phone brands are giving us this. I like everything to be combined into one, so I'm not a fan of this. But otherwise, the UI looks pretty clean and minimal. Okay, time to talk camera. So this camera system here, it's headlined by this 50 megapixel retractable portrait lens, and it has a really fast aperture of f1.5. Usually zoom lenses in smartphones have a slower aperture. Tecno gave this lens a faster aperture, which along with pixel binning allows it to take in a lot more light. Because usually with other smartphones, zoom lenses suffer in the dark. Not so here. I do find that it suffers with focus sometimes, but otherwise in terms of taking in light, it actually does a really good job. Down here is a 50 megapixel main camera, Samsung GNV sensor. So it's the same sensor used in the Vivo X80 Pro. It has a relatively large 1/1.3 inch image sensor. And on top of that, Tecno is using an RGBW filtering array for the main camera to take in more light. There's also a 13 megapixel ultra wide camera here. This is probably the weak link of the three lenses. During the day it's great, but at night images are quite soft, which is the case for most ultra wide cameras. Around the front you have a 32 megapixel selfie camera, and the selfie camera is really funky. Tecno has built in a lot of crazy aggressive beauty filters, including one that makes my eyebrows look stronger and gives me colored contacts. I mean, I think I look really freaky here, but maybe some people like this look. I do think it's pretty fun to play with, but overall, I would take selfies with all the filters turned off. But back to this rear camera system, like I said, I think the retractable portrait lens actually works. I like to be able to get natural bokeh and separation between the subject and background. I think these samples here all look pretty good. As for the main camera, I am pleasantly surprised. Look at these full samples here. I think they all look really good. I'm also impressed by the video performance. You can shoot up to 4K 30 and stabilization is surprisingly good. During the day, it's about as good as any other flagship Android phone. And even at night, it still holds up pretty well. There's a little bit of jitteriness, but you get that from every phone not named the iPhone. Battery life has been really good with this phone. I've taken this phone out all day for 15 hours with about 6 hours of screen on time, and I will finish the day with like 18–20% battery life left. So overall, there's a lot to like with the Tecno Phantom X2, including and especially the fact that this thing doesn't look and feel like any other phone on the market. It zigs where others zag. It has its own personality, its own distinct design language, and it has a technology that has never before seen and never before done in a smartphone. And surprisingly, it's not like a plain gimmick. It actually works quite well. I do think $900 is a little bit too expensive considering Tecno is still a relatively smaller brand. It's not a household name like a Xiaomi yet. But if you ignore the branding, you're getting a almost tip-top flagship chipset, a surprisingly really good camera. It is really impressive how a relatively smaller company like Tecno has been able to pump out image processing software that is almost on par with the big boys. A zoom lens that actually works. The only thing I don't like is the ultra-wide camera. And you also have a great battery life and stereo speakers too. So it ticks almost every box except for wireless charging, IP rating, and I guess Android updates. Because Tecno is a smaller brand, I wouldn't expect this phone to get Android 13 anytime soon, so that's another factor. And I guess also availability, because again, this phone is launching in Dubai and it's probably going to go on sale in regions that are developing. You're not going to find this in London, in New York, in Tokyo. Instead, you'll find this in South Africa, maybe Indonesia, maybe like Ethiopia, places like that. So that's about it for this review of the Tecno Phantom X2. If you enjoyed this video or you want to keep up to date with the latest in smartphones, please consider subscribing to my channel or following me on Instagram at Ben's Gadget Reviews. That's it for now. Thanks for watching.